Welcome to the Restoring Our Cities podcast. We are excited to bring you another episode in our leadership series. And in this episode, we are connecting with Stanley Sam, who is the founder of WACONE, a great organization that clothes, feeds, and provides clean drinking water to people in need. Some incredible work that he's doing. And so we're excited to share his insights on leadership and just the characteristics of a leader who's really taken some really great leaps and risks and just really displaying courage in what he's done. So we're excited to have that conversation. It's a really inspiring one, so do not miss it. And if you are new to the Restoring Our Cities podcast, this is our platform where we have unfiltered conversations on today's topics that are really impacting our generation and our community. And so we hope this conversation with Stanley leaves you inspired, encouraged, and really helps you take that leap that you might be hesitant on really making a change. So enjoy, and we look forward to connecting with you. I'm super excited to have Stanley Sam. We've been friends for a while, and I just feel like I don't get to talk to you enough. And I'm so excited that you are on this week's episode. And would love to just jump in. We are in this new series of leadership. And one of the first people that I thought of to just talk to about leadership and just understanding the characteristics of a leader is Stanley. And yeah, I mean, let me just kind of compliment him. I know he wouldn't do that himself, but I appreciate just how he's impacted his community. And these are the conversations that I want everyone to hear in, my circle of influence or my community. I think people need to hear from people like Stan. And so I'm so excited that you jumped on. How are you doing, man? It's been so long since we've actually seen each other in person.
Thank you, brother. No, I really appreciate it, Joe. Seriously. Really, I mean, I'm humbled to be on here. We have known each other for quite some time. I'm doing great. And I have been listening to your episodes and your podcast, and people who haven't been listening, man, they're missing out. I'm really proud of you, seriously, for doing this and for talking about things that people are afraid to talk about these days.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm glad that just we're having dialogue, and I feel like that's happening now more in maybe just this context or whatever year we're in now of 2020. I
Yeah.
feel like there's been this talk of having conversations and sparking conversations, and I'm hoping that's happening now. But yeah, I really appreciate you jumping on and that we get to connect in this platform. But before we get into any details, tell us a little bit about yourself, Stan, like where you're from, what you're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm originally from Philly. Originally from India, obviously. I have to clarify that for people sometimes
Yeah.
because I've been asked that question my entire life. Yes, I am Indian.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, crazy story about that. When I was 5 months old at the airport, the people at TSA asked my parents if I was their child just because I looked Italian
Wow.
or Hispanic. And so this has been an ongoing thing my entire life. Yes.
Wow.
But yes, Indian from India. I was raised in North Philly my entire life, and I at the age of 15, I was doctors found a tumor the size of a baseball growing on my liver. Went in for this really simple routine, what was supposed to be a routine surgery. Tumor exploded on contact while they were trying to take a piece of it. And I was diagnosed with a rare form of liver cancer called hepatocellular carcinoma. I was given 6 months to live, but it's been over 20 years. I'm 110% cancer free, man.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I feel great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I've been privileged to hear your testimony. I know you come out to Chicago almost 10 years ago now, and shared that, and it's just so inspiring to hear, what you've gone through, but what you continue to do. That's what's even more impressive. So Philly, just answer everybody. What's the cheesesteak place that we need to go to? Is there? I think was it
Oh man,
Geno's?
I will tell you where not to go, and it's
Okay.
Pat's and Geno's.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, you do not want to go to Pat's. You do not want to go to Geno's. There's a few places. D'Alessandro's is great.
Okay.
Jim's is pretty good. It's hit or miss every once in a while. It's a place called Ishkabibbles, which is also really good.
Ishkabibbles. I
Um,
need to Yelp this. Okay.
but for our Indian community, man, there is now an Indian chicken cheesesteak place.
I've heard of this. Is this in Philly or Jersey?
It's in Philly. It's in
Okay.
South Philly. It's called Little Sicily 2.
Okay.
I
Okay.
know. Yeah. I tell everybody it's like Sicily Auntie, but probably not Sicily.
Better way to bookmark it. Man, like my wife and I, we've traveled a lot, like in the country. I had one of those Southwest companion passes, and we really took advantage of it.
Yeah.
Um, but like Philly, I don't know why we haven't come out to Philly, and we need to explore it. Um,
Come to Philly, man. Seriously, it's
yeah,
an amazing city.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
my younger brother is a huge Rocky fan, and I feel like one of these days we just need to do the whole touristy thing and run up the steps and all that stuff. But I know there's
Oh,
probably a lot more than that.
do it, man. Yeah. Philly's an amazing city, and it's like Chicago. It's a good city you could eat your way through.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, that's why I feel like I resonate with it a little bit. I love the character of a city. I live in the city in Chicago,
Yeah.
and my wife and I, we both love the city. And it's just something about the smells, the people, the diversity, the
Yeah.
rudeness. I don't know what it is. It's something about it. I love it. But you're not in Philly now, right?
I'm not in Philly. No. So I've actually lived in a city called Bel Air. It's a true story. Yes, I went from Philly to Bel Air,
Yeah.
not in California. I'm still on the East Coast. I know everyone, every time they hear that, they're like, hold on, I've heard this story before.
Right.
You
Right.
got into, no. But
Right.
yeah, I've been out here for 3 years now. I left Philly about 6 years ago, but I love to visit, love going back. So it's always my home, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's awesome, man. I'm glad to hear that you're doing some great things at where you are, even though you're not in your kind of place of origin with in Philly. But like, tell us a little bit about what you're doing right now with your
Yeah.
organization and just kind of the work life that you're involved with.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it's important to kind of note this. Um, haven't really said this publicly too much, but I was working for a corporate company for 7.5 years. I was in corporate America and just felt this call of God just on my heart to leave. And so I left a Fortune 50 company, um, making six figures a year. I was good. I was comfortable, but I just felt like God was just kind of pushing me to step out, and so I did that. And so about 10 years ago, I launched this charitable clothing company, and so we're actually relaunching that again now. And so for the last 24 months, I've been traveling. We focus on doing food, water, and clothing projects, and so we help bring food, water, and clothing to people in need all over the world. And so the idea is, with our charitable clothing company, we sell T-shirts, hats, hoodies, mugs, and we use that profit to help fund some of these projects. So we just drilled two water wells in the last 24 months. So we did one in
Wow.
Haiti, we did one in Guatemala. I took teams over there with us to do these projects, to interact with the community, teach them hygiene lessons, and then last year we did a really cool project. We brought 500 volunteers together in my church's lobby and packed 108,000 meals, and we
Wow.
sent those over to Africa. And so the goal is, within the next 5 years, to hit 1 million meals.
That's awesome. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah,
Um, That's incredible. And I mean, first of all, just risking, you know, you know, everything and just leaving the comforts of your job. Um,
yeah,
maybe let's stay there for a second.
sure.
It's kind of like, oh yeah, and I left, and then now I'm doing this amazing work. How did you do that? Like, how would you take the risk, and what really motivated you to say, hey, this is the right decision?
Oh man, I think there's a lot behind that. When I was going through my cancer, one of the prayers that I prayed, and it's one of those funny things. God always remembers those prayers that you
Yeah.
pray. I feel like um, after my fourth round of chemotherapy, the doctors called and they said, "Hey, Stan, we're really sorry, but your tumor cells are still way too high." They actually told my parents to start preparing for my funeral at
Wow.
that point. And I got on my knees next to my bed and I said, God, if you're real and you're the same God that I read about in the Bible, I said, you have to heal me. I'll serve you for the rest of my life. And at that point, they hadn't they didn't really see any improvement in any of the tumor marker cells in my body. And so I said that prayer, went back into hospital, and the doctor comes in. She says, Stan, I don't know what kind of God you prayed to. I don't know what it is that you did, but your tumor cells just start to disappear off charts in such a rapid rate. You're
Wow.
completely healed. And so that thing of God remembering prayers, I was at my company, and I was doing well. I had this one year where I felt like, God, this is it. Like this is my year. It was
Mhm.
right before I was about to leave. Right before I was about to leave, and I was like, okay, God, like maybe this is it. And I said this prayer to God. I said, God, if I win this award called the President's Club Award, I'm gonna leave. Like that's just gonna be it.
Mhm.
And the rankings came out, and I missed it by 2 points.
Wow.
I said, oh man. So the next year, um, I was I'm working from home. My VP says, "Hey, I think you should watch this. It's a live streaming that the company I work for that they do."
Mhm.
Um, and she said, "Hey, I think you should watch this." I said, "No, I've been up for that award the last 2 years in a row." I said, "I'm not going to do it." And before that, I did pray this prayer. I said, and I said, God, at the end of this year, like this is it. I'm going to do it.
Right.
And yeah, and I had started planning this trip to Hawaii 3 days before this ranking thing comes out. And anyway, uh, they come back, they say, hey, we just want to announce the winners. And the winner this year is Stanley Sam.
Wow.
And this year, because it's our 10-year anniversary of President's Club, you and your partner win an all expense paid trip to Hawaii.
That's incredible.
and, and I just jumped up out of my seat, and I just felt like God was like, hey, I felt the Holy Spirit's like tug of like, hey, you remember that prayer that you prayed
Mhm.
last year? I just wanted to honor that for you before you left. And so it was in Hawaii that I gave my letter of resignation
Wow.
to the vice president. Yeah.
Just wanted to have a scenic backdrop while you,
I just figured the sunset and,
yeah, make it
eating some.
softer for them to accept it. Oh man,
Exactly.
that must be incredibly difficult to do. Like you're at the peak of your
Yeah.
career. Um,
Yeah. People ask all the time. They're like, hey, like, was it, was it a bad situation? And, I mean, just like every job, right? There's ups and downs,
right.
but no, I was doing well. You're right. Like I was at the peak.
Yeah, I mean it's
Yeah.
harder to go out on top, right? Like Michael hitting the game six in Utah.
That's
Like
it,
how do you
man.
leave after that? But man,
Yeah.
if that's not a compliment to you from a guy from Chicago, I don't know what is. But that's awesome, man. I'm so glad to hear that. I hope that encourages people who are listening too about, what's stopping me from taking the leap or what's holding me back. But so you take this leap and you want to move forward with this brand new venture. Um, but it's just not any kind of new business idea. It's something that you're doing so great for your community. Tell us a little bit about like maybe the reason and the purpose of why you wanted to, I don't know, just make an organization that is, focused on channeling efforts for good.
Yeah. Um, I think there's a couple parts to it. I think there's the idea of we come from a third world country, right? Like we come from India, and I remember my first time when I was 8 years old. We were going through our flight went from Kerala to Bombay, and then over to Heathrow, and then right to New York, and that's usually the route that people would take back then. And
Mhm.
I remember seeing poverty and injustice at 8 years old because a little kid came up to our window, and he was my age, and he was begging for food and for money. And I've never seen it, I've
Yeah.
never seen that before. Even growing up in North Philly, I mean, you don't see kids out on the street begging. And I remember saying, God, if you ever give me a chance to come back here and to help these kids, I want to do that. I have no idea, man, like
Mm.
where that came from, but I think it was just instilled within me. And so I've always had this idea of like wanting to help and to serve people in need. I think it's something that God has always kind of like put on my heart.
Yeah. That's
Um, yeah,
that's awesome, man. It's very inspiring too. I feel like that's our duty, especially as believers, right? Like that's something that should just be inherent in us as if we believe in the message of the gospel. And um, I think this is kind of relatable too because of the climate we're in, right? Like
Yeah.
We're in this crazy 2020 world, and obviously, even on our podcast, we've had several episodes about social justice and like how do we approach this topic of, the injustices that are happening in our community and things like that. Um, how has that maybe impacted you and maybe your vision of, with this organization as well?
Yeah. Man, I mean, so me being a kid who, and just for context for people who aren't familiar with Philly, so I grew up next to the projects in Philly. I mean, my entire life. Like that's just kind of. So I've seen racial injustice from the beginning. I've seen it from being a kid, and one of my really good friends, one of my I consider him one of my best friends, Rashid. He, him and I were talking just on my on my deck about 3 weeks ago, and we were saying, he's also a kid from Philly, um, and he was saying, man, like I've always thought that things like this were normal, and that's
Mhm.
what I thought too. We just thought anytime we get pulled over, we should be afraid.
Right.
Because I mean, I'm this kid who grew up in North Philly, but I'm also like a kid who would go to church, and I go to a Malayali Pentecostal church, and
Right.
and so there's a huge identity crisis there almost. It's like, man, I go home and like all my friends are black and Hispanic, and then I go to church and like all my friends are Indian.
Yeah.
And so I almost had this like these two worlds that I lived in, and I got to see things like, from different perspectives. And so, yeah, I mean, so for us, we've always thought it was a normal thing. We always just thought that this is just, how life is supposed to be, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so now I live in a suburb called Bel Air,
Right.
right? And yeah, and about 6 years ago when we got married, we moved to Delaware, and I started going to an American church, like a pretty predominant Caucasian church,
Mhm.
and it was like the first time I had white friends, really.
Wow.
Um, yeah, and so um, I think just kind of like here, I kind of have this opportunity of like hearing it from both sides,
Yeah.
right? And it's been amazing. It's been cool to kind of like see like both perspectives of like, hey, there's racial injustice over here, and then another group saying, well, no, we don't really see racial injustice. Like,
Yeah. Like their
yeah,
worldview is so different based on where you grew up in. I feel like it has such a impact on how you see the world and maybe what you think is the status quo, right? Like however we
yeah,
define that. Um, but that's so interesting, especially from your background and seeing that and getting exposed to injustices at such an early age. Do you feel like that kind of shaped what you do now, I guess, as far as for your organization and like the mission and vision behind it?
yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think even the way that God made me to look. I know it might sound funny to some people, but even just like how I look, I'm such a Alyssa looked at me just recently and she's like, "You're so ambiguous." Like I was like been married for like 6 years, but she's
Right.
just like I just can't even tell like what race you are sometimes. And
Yeah.
and and I say that, but I think that God has used that in so many different ways because I've been able to talk to so many different groups and so many different races, and they don't know whether they should be racist to me or not sometimes because they're just like, "What is this kid?
True.
I don't even know."
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no. So
Oh,
I think
wow.
yeah. So I think God allowing me to grow up where I grew up, and then having this like this worldview, but then also having this like biblical perspective of like, you know, we are created in the image of God, and so
Mhm.
we should treat everybody that way, right? Like if we're created in God's image, and that's what God expects of us, then that's how we should love other people. So yeah, so I think yeah, I think it definitely had an impact on me.
That's so great to hear, and I think it's eye-opening for people who are listening too, maybe to start to review, all right, this is where I grew up, and this is maybe how, my experiences, and maybe it shaped the biases or whatever it is.
Sure.
And maybe it's one of those things, and I definitely want to hear more about like what you're doing about it too, right? Because like if that's shaped you, that's one thing, but it shapes you for a purpose, right? Like there's got to be some
Sure.
kind of action going forward. So, um, like what are some of the things that you've seen, in these projects that you've been doing and these wells that you've been building? Like that's another perspective that you're probably seeing that others, especially here in the States, probably don't get to see every day. So how has those experiences like really shaped you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think just like eh, we're all ultimately we're all ultimately the same, right? Like at
Hmm.
the end of the day, we all want like justice. We all like crave like love. We're just humans um that like all are all created in the image of God. And so I think just doing some of these projects, man, just getting to like know people and getting to like love on some people just really kind of shows like the heart of like mankind, just like, hey, like, we all just want to live in this world and we all just want to have peace.
Yeah.
um that's ultimately like really what it is, right?
Yeah, it affirms
Yeah.
like why we were built the way we were built and how God designed us, right? I don't know, it's like one of those things where you do a project, and I don't even want to just
Sure.
make it trivial like a project because this is like your life's work, right?
Yeah.
But you accomplish a goal and you feel so good about it, especially when it's rooted in the right cause. It's more than just hitting the sales goal, right?
Yeah.
It's like you build a well and give people clean water. I think there's some extra level of um, I don't know, just affirmation about what God's plan is for your life. I don't know how much bigger I could make it than that. There's got to be
uh,
something so positive about that. I guess whenever you build another well or accomplish another thing or clothe another child, right?
yeah.
So yeah, I feel like that's so awesome to see that that's kind of the directive that you're going with. And one of the reasons why I really wanted you on this podcast is to kind of help our generation, our community,
Sure.
kind of see this and not to put you on a pedestal, but like,
Uh,
what are some of the takeaways that folks can kind of glean from your decisions and your choices to take steps forward where others haven't? Not everybody's out there making companies and clothing people, right? Like, what are some of
yeah.
those lessons you want people to learn?
Yeah, I mean, so I think the biggest thing is, man, just do, sometimes you just have to do what you're called to and not necessarily like what you're passionate about. And so there's a fine line there, right? So, and I think that God will always use the things that you are called to, like as long as you stay in those lanes. And that goes for, and that you can take that anywhere, right? So for me, for example, I am, and I know you are too, I'm super passionate about human trafficking. I've been to Bombay before. Like I've seen these areas like the red light district. I've seen women who have been enslaved before. But for me, I felt like the call that God had on my life was food, water, clothing, like literally these three essentials. I was on a Zoom call a few weeks ago with the director of a huge um, food organization that we work with, and she was saying that anytime food scarcity, this idea of like food scarcity or like hunger goes up in the world, simultaneously human trafficking goes up in the world.
Wow.
Now, here's the amazing thing, right? So people have always come to me and said, "Hey, like, why don't you do something with human trafficking?" I said, "Yeah, like, while that sounds great, I need to stay in my lane of what I'm called to."
Hmm.
And it's so amazing to see, like, hey, like, if I, at me staying in my lane of helping provide food for people, simultaneously means that a mother doesn't have to sell her child into
Right.
human trafficking. And so that's just me staying in my lane of what I'm called to do.
Yeah.
Um, in the same way with Christians, right? Like, what are we good at? Are we good at politics? I mean, maybe not,
Right.
but what are we called to do? We're called to love people, right? And I think that's like what we need to exercise the most these days is, hey, maybe we necessarily don't have to take like a side on something. Maybe we exercise like the love that God has given us more than anything else.
That's so good, man. I feel like, there's like this negative attitude towards being a little bit more moderate, right? Like you have to be polarizing, or else you're not going to get the views, or you're not going to
Yeah.
get the clicks. Um, but I mean, I was talking to a friend the other day where, like, our biblical worldview isn't liberal or conservative. It is wholly unique because the
Yeah.
gospel goes against a lot of these different ideologies where it's like, man, we are called to love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. It could be that simple, right? And we just need to
Yeah.
execute. That's awesome to hear. I mean, um, sometimes we need to stay in our lane, but we veer a lot, right? Have you
Sure.
ever experienced that where you've been tempted to kind of veer and like
Oh man.
master jack of all trades?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I've had I've had way more private conversations about the issue of like racial injustice and inequality than I have public.
Hmm.
And I think that's important. I think we're so quick to put up a flag of the last name of a president in front of our yards rather than having like a private conversation with a neighbor just because it's just like, hey, let's put these barriers up,
Mm,
right? And or like we're so quick to post something on social media of like, hey, like here's my stand, man, like here's what I believe in, but we won't DM that person that we're upset at. But that's what I've done. I've seen these things. I've seen a lot of these, and I think the one thing that I've tried to lead with and is one of my heroes in the faith, Rabbi Zachariah, always said, our job is not to win the argument, but it's always to win the person,
yeah.
right?
Yep.
And I think as Christians, we're forgetting that these days. We're just so quick to, hey, like, let me show you how bad this one side is. But it's like, whoa, like, hold on, like, we're all bad, right? Like inherently, like we all
Right.
have some sin inside of us. Um, I did student ministry in my old church for about 4 years. I had one of my students post something about George Floyd and listed all the wrong things that George Floyd did, right? And I'm sure you've probably seen like this
Hmm.
post too. Um, and so I sent her a private message. I said, "Hey," I said, "Can I talk to you about this?" She said, "Yeah, absolutely." Um, I said, "Can we, what was the reason that you felt that you should post this? Like, can you, well, like he was a bad man and, he did all these things." I said, "Okay." And I don't know. Gosh, I need like well, all right, we'll use Jen's name, for
Uh-huh,
example.
uh-huh,
Okay.
uh-huh.
Um, so her name isn't Jen, but I
Right.
won't put her on blast. But
Yeah.
I said, "Hey, Jen, can I have a conversation with you about this? Is that okay?" I said, let's take a look at this. I said, so you said that, that George Floyd was bad and he did all these wrong things. I said, like, can I ask you a question? Like, have you ever, like, as a person, like, have you ever like stolen anything? Right, this Roman road idea. Like, have you ever stolen
Mhm.
anything? She said, yeah, yeah, like, I've probably stolen something. Like, I said, even like a pencil eraser.
Right.
So yeah, yeah, yeah. I said, okay, so like, have you ever like told a lie? She said, yeah, absolutely, I've told a lie. I said, okay, like, have you ever wished bad on anybody? Which is kind of like what her post was about. Like, hey, George Floyd deserved to die,
Right.
right? I said, yeah, absolutely. I said, according to Bible says that, even if you wish bad on somebody, that's almost like murdering them, right? That's what Jesus said.
Mhm.
I said, so far you've broken 3 out of the 10 commandments. I said, would you consider yourself to be a good person? She said, oh, well, I mean,
Light
I
bulb.
guess, yeah, well, I guess not. And so the so she comes back with, well, I'm not one to forgive. God is the one, like,
Mm.
who should forgive people. I said, okay. I said, Jen, can we go through another, can I tell you like another story just really quickly? She said, yeah, absolutely. So I make the story up. I said, hey, there's this guy named Bob, and Bob goes to this conference at his church for blind people, and Bob's blind, and he goes to this conference for blind people. And Bob goes up to the front, and he receives healing, um, and receives his sight back. And then what Bob does is he turns around and he mocks everybody else because they're all blind. And as he's walking out, he pushes people out the way and says, "Get out of here! Move, you blind person! Why are you bumping into me?" She said, "Oh man." I said, "What do you think about Bob?" She said, "Well, that's horrible."
Mhm.
I said, "Can I tell you another story?" She said, "Sure." I said, "There's a girl named Jen. and she goes to church and she receives forgiveness for her sins. And then she turns around and she looks at everybody and she mocks them for not receiving that same
Mm.
forgiveness. I said,
Huh.
what do you think about her? And just complete dead silence. And in
Wow.
the middle of that, she actually deleted that post.
Hmm. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's leadership, you know? And to me, like that's leadership. And I know we've been talking about social justice and all the craziness that's happening in the world, but the response to the polarizing commentary and kind of some of these dangerous ways of thinking, I think as Christians, what's really going to set apart the leaders from the followers is our approach to our fellow brothers and sisters, right? Like
Yeah.
you could easily have responded to that post publicly and said, "Hey, this is wrong, and let me give you the 10 reasons why." But
Yeah.
like out of sight, out of view, private message, let me take you under my wing and like help you through this. And you're not even like speaking to her, just talking at her. You're trying to understand her, which, man, that's leadership. And I
Um,
really wish we could help people understand and maybe and that's a great example, Stan. I guess when we talk to these young people who are really, I guess, quick trigger fingers on their phone, right? And quick to
sure.
post. And sometimes that translates into their life too, right? They might make impulsive decisions with the next career or next step, or even just their thoughts and worldviews. Like, how do we curtail that? How do we slow that down? Is there any advice that you can give someone before they make the next horrible post on their social media feed?
Oh man. I think someone gave me a good piece of advice is, hey, always wait 30 minutes before you post something. I mean, seriously, that's just
Yeah,
like a such a practical thing. I think that goes for a lot, right? Even out of anger, hey, just wait a few minutes before you respond in anger,
yeah,
right? But I think there's also something to be said about like there's a root of you have to get down to the root sometimes of like why people feel this way.
yeah.
And like for example, that girl, Jen, she was, her for her, she was saying, hey, like I've gone through a lot in my life, and a lot of this, like what I've learned is basically like my parents have taught me this, and my uncle has said a lot of these things, and so she told me, she said, I'm just kind of like learning from what they've told me. Um, but getting down to the root of it, I you know, as the conversation went on, it was almost a 2 hour conversation. And as the conversation went on, she just said to me, she said, Stan, I always like, I just respect you a lot. And I've always noticed this about her. During our student ministry, she would always like purposely come to me and, say goodbye to me at the end of
Mhm.
every one of our sessions. I just, I've never had a private conversation with her, never like talked to her one-on-one, but she just always had this like level of respect for me, and I just never knew why. And she said, I just wanted to let you know that 2 years ago you stopped me from killing myself.
Wow.
Whoa. She said, because you shared your story once with me, and she said I never had a chance to tell you this, but yeah, she said you helped me to not commit suicide and take. She was like, I was planning on taking my life that night,
Wow.
and then she goes. She goes, yeah, I'm really sorry for posting that because I know you're black and I know how much that must affect you. Dude,
Oh, man.
just yeah, I'd never correct anybody when
Okay.
they guess my race. I was just like,
Right.
yeah, it's all good, no worries.
That's
Like,
funny. But man, like just the fact that you were able to be open and honest and share and being transparent with people, just look at the ramifications, right? Look at
sure,
the the way that God deals with people. And I think just kind of bringing it back to what you're doing now, it's taking these steps to impact change and really create change. And I could see those leadership attributes in you. So and I don't want to keep you on terribly long, but so if you when you're talking about your organization, you're doing so many great things, globally, have all these great goals. How do you inspire someone to maybe not necessarily do exactly what you're doing, but how do you inspire that next generation, the people behind us, coming alongside us, how do you inspire them to actually make those tangible decisions to make change?
Yeah. Tangible decisions make change. I mean, I think it's stop canceling culture, right?
Mm.
I think so many of us are just so quick to be like, oh, well, I don't agree with that. So I'm not going to listen to that. And but you may be missing an opportunity there, right? So I have people who have posted things and said things, and I've never unfriended anybody. I've never unfollowed anybody.
Yeah,
It's just, there's this, and I think it's this idea of just listening to like the needs of people, and do what you're good at. I think one of the best pieces of advice that I've heard is find something that you would wake up and do for completely free,
yeah,
and then find a way to get paid for it.
right, right.
Right. So, yeah. And so for me, I think for me, it was, hey, like I would wake up and serve people all the time. Like, I mean, I love doing that. Like
Yeah,
that would be awesome for me. And so I think I found a way to do that. And so for the next generation, man, just be open and willing to like listen to the needs of people around you. If that's a call of God on your life or
right,
whatever you feel like, and just go towards it. And then if the door closes, hey, there's going to be another door that opens. That's
right.
okay. Yeah.
Man, that's encouraging. And I hope people listening out there who have these ideas, and it's funny, even um, as we started this podcast, people have asked, "Oh, I want to do this, I want to do that," and you know, go for it. Just go for it. Don't be afraid of failure. And I think that's a great attribute of leadership too, right? Like the courage to take the risk and go for it, but also like following the call of God. I think that's so important to really understand and find time and seek His will in your life.
Yeah.
And
Because
um,
you'll be mocked for it. I mean, I
yeah,
have been. Like I remember doing an event, man, and it was this this girl came up to me and she's just like came up with me with like a group of people, and she's like, oh, "You're still doing this T-shirt thing, really?"
really,
And this is like a Christian conference,
yeah,
and I was like, "Yeah." I said, there's still 700 million people that don't have access to clean drinking water, and about 30,000 that die every day from hunger. So yeah, I'm still kind of doing this.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and
That's
even
incredible.
family members, man, like um who will just kind of give you like second looks for wanting to step out, right? Because I mean, nobody in the Indian community is like, designing and selling clothes. I mean, at least that I know of, right?
Yeah.
And so this was something very different, especially like 10 years ago when I started doing this. Everyone just kind of like looked at me and was like, dude, you're a little crazy, but
So
hey, man.
for the people who know what ethnicity you are, I mean, don't you feel like there is like this extra layer of burden, like being from the South Asian community? Do you feel like that was like an extra layer of like, I don't know, a burden to be a leader in some ways? I mean, maybe that's one of those things that inherently we don't grow up with, knowing how to take risks and knowing to take the challenge of doing something on our own. Like, do you feel like that was
Yeah.
a layer of complexity for you?
Oh my gosh, absolutely, man. 100%. Yeah, I mean, I think my people always tell me, "Oh, hey, like you're gonna be called. You're gonna be called to the ministry." And I was just like, "Oh man, like, dude, I'm not gonna be a pastor. Like, that's just not me, man. Like, I like hip hop. Like, that's
Right.
just like it's just not who. But I think there's this thing of just being authentic,
Hmm.
and just being like authentic, just being transparent of of who you are, and and who God has called you to be. You don't hear like perfect stories in the Bible, right?
Right.
The Bible is full of like imperfect stories, imperfect people who just kind of like made mistakes and went in different directions, right? And those are the people that God uses. And
Exactly.
I man, I remember being on the phone. Oh man, they're gonna listen to this too. But I
Right.
was on the phone with my pastor's son, with their sons. And I remember their when we were little, and their mom being like, "Oh, you're talking to that kid Stanley, don't talk to him. He's a bad influence." Like, and I wasn't a bad kid. I just like, I was just different. I was just a different person, like
Mhm.
I was different. And so people just didn't like that. But hey, like
Not like the
God
rest, but
uses.
yeah, that's so
Yeah,
great and an important lesson I think people need to hear. I hear that a lot, especially from our community, even when it comes to like things like marriage, right? Like they want the storybook, I meet this person and this we get along and boom, married, kids,
sure.
house, boom. And the narrative, right? But man, if we can get that grasp, young people, if you're listening, and I can say young because like my hair is almost completely white now, it's man, if you could just realize that you are going to mess up and it's okay, right?
Yeah,
Like when you said people make fun of you or like even for what you're doing or for such a noble cause. I don't get it. I don't understand how people can say that, but like how do you let that slide off your back? And how do you keep going? How do you let that not discourage you?
you know what it is. I think there was when you when you really feel like that call of God on your life, or when you really feel like, hey, like this is what I'm not just like called to do, but there's a mix of like, man, I'm passionate about it. Um, I remember there's been just so many times of just going back to my Bible and just like opening up Matthew chapter 25, 31 to 40, where it says, hey, I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me some drink. I was naked and you clothed me. I remember once sitting there thinking, God, like, is this like really like what I should be doing? Like, is this really? And bro, like I'm telling you, man, like I mean, I'm passionate about the Bible now, but there's like, I mean, growing up, like in my Sunday school, like I was somewhat of a bad kid, so I know what my pastor's mom said that, but like, I never really like listened or really learned the Bible when I was younger. But I remember like sitting there once, and I just felt really like the Holy Spirit said, "Turn the page." And so I
Oh,
was like, okay. So I turned the page of like, and I felt it so strong in my heart of just like turn the page and read what's before this. And I turned the page, and the parable that was two parables before that was a parable of the talents,
yeah.
and like sowing these talents, man, and just like letting God multiply, like just seeing a multiplication, right? And just stop burying those talents and those skills that you have, and like put those talents to work, and like you'll see those talents just be multiplied.
Yeah.
And so for anybody that's listening who is fearful and who is like kind of like on the fence of doing something, like I would tell you, look, like go forward in prayer. Like if you feel like you're called to do it, like go for it. And hey, the worst thing that can happen is that you get a scrape, right? But you learn from it and you get a cool story out of it.
Yep.
But you just keep going.
That's a life lesson right there. I mean, how many bruises and stuff like we can think of when we were kids, and even some of the tough situations that we maybe grew up with that are like distant memories. Maybe that comes with wisdom, right? Like we actually forget about some of those things, but it does shape us into who we are ultimately called to be. Um,
Yeah.
it's so inspiring to talk to you, man. Like every single time I talk to you, which isn't much. I think we need to do this regularly.
Yeah.
But man, it's always encouraging, inspiring to hear your story. And I hope the folks who are listening just kind of take some notes because it's not just like, hey, I have a cool idea, I'm gonna go for it. It's these things are rooted in the plan of God and like
Yeah.
trusting in what the Bible says and like really seeking after Him and He directs your path, right? Like
Yeah.
it always goes back to what God is calling us to do.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, go ahead. Any final thoughts? Like what can we do to help you and support your organization and obviously help feed, clothe, and support all these needy people around the world?
Yeah, man. I'll end this with this one thing. I know we didn't get a chance to really talk about it too much, but just like how we know each other,
Yeah, yeah.
man. And that was even like a leap of faith as well too. I know Steve was, Steve came to my parents' church. This was like, I don't even remember when rock started, like 15,
2005, 2005. I know the
man.
dates, man. I know the dates.
He came and I just felt like God was like, "Hey, you need to talk to this kid and tell him that he's going to be part of something in Chicago." And I was like, "No, God, that's so weird." And I'm literally sitting there like wrestling with God almost. Of like, "No, I'm not saying anything. That's super weird. I'm not doing that." Finally, just build up the courage and walk up to this kid. I'm just like, "Look, man, I don't know what it is. I just have to tell you this, but you're going to be part of something like really big in Chicago, and it's going to be like a ministry. It's going to be a movement." And I really think that you just need to go back and just pray about this thing. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, where
He,
the story went from there.
oh, I'll tell you, it's literally it's so crazy. So Steve Chaco, who's been on this podcast, he helped us start restoring our city and rock, and he came back from that trip, and we started like a prayer group. We affectionately called it TNP for Thursday night prayer because we would get together every Thursday night. Still goes on to this day, different people, and it's great. But he came back that night, and he's like, "Man, this weird dude just came up to me." He told us, and it was just funny because we started the TMP group that like couple weeks, like within that same time frame, and he was just like,
Oh
"It's so
man.
weird," and we all looked at him, we're like, "Okay, like what else?" It's like I don't know. He just said that we're doing something. We're like, "Okay," took it as a word of encouragement. Um, and man, I'll tell you, Stan, like as a word of encouragement to you, because like fast forward almost 5 years later, our friend Steve moved to Detroit and he was going to law school there. And he was telling me that he had on his heart to go to Mumbai to do this mission trip. And he's like, "Do you
Yeah.
know anybody who is organizing any trips?" And I'll be like, "I'll let you know." And we got in touch. I think you guys were coming out from Philly to Chicago to do like an outreach event, and we talked. And I actually went up to visit Steve in Detroit because we were coordinating this event together. And so I go up there
Yeah.
and I'm like, "Hey, do you know a guy named Stanley?" And he's like, "Man, that sounds familiar." And I started to be like, "Hey, you should call him because he has some info about this mission trip." And I start to tell him your number, and as he's typing it in his phone, he reads off the last couple digits. He's like, "I already know this guy." And
That's
then it
crazy.
clicked for us that you were the guy who told him about um, rock, really. And at this point, it's been 5 years, and we've done so many different things in the city. And we kind of like understood, hey, this was from God, but we didn't put it together that it was you. And then all of a sudden, Steve goes on this mission trip to Mumbai, and he's been passionate about helping solve the crisis of human trafficking. And
Amazing.
dude, it's we can only see God working through these crazy avenues, right?
Yeah. And I think just even that, man, is just like kind of that whole thing of like stepping out in faith and just having those conversations that you feel like, hey, this is strong on my heart. Like I really feel like I should have this conversation. Um, yeah, man. And so and I guess to answer your question, yeah, wacone.com, WACONE. It's our website. You can go on there, can buy products. We're going to basically be doing like a pretty big relaunch, and that's the same name on Instagram as well too. You can follow us on there. That's really it. Just we'd hope to be on everybody's Christmas list this year. If you're
Yeah.
listening, just pick up something, buy something for a friend, for a family member, and we use those profits to basically help do what Matthew chapter 25 says, and to give water to the thirsty, food for the hungry, and clothing the naked.
It's awesome, and I saw some of the products that you are gonna be launching soon, and they're pretty sharp, man. There's this coffee mug that says this mug turns coffee into clean water, and I know, surprise, my wife's probably gonna get that for Christmas. We are some coffee addicts here, but I mean,
Cool.
how great is it to not only like help support fellow members of our community, people who are doing great things and being leaders, but also through your purchases help solve these crises that are actually happening in the world today.
Yeah.
Stan, thank you so much for being on. I know we talked about this for such a long time, and I'm so glad to
Yeah.
finally have you on. We're so excited for your launch. For everyone out there listening, please check out wacone.com. Um, so excited, and we'll be happy to plug whatever we need to plug because
Thank
you
you.
could make a difference through your purchase. So excited for everything you're doing, man. I'm hoping once Corona and everything stops that we actually get to see each other in person or make a trip and get some genuine, true cheesesteaks in Philly.
Yeah, man, for sure. And the feeling is mutual. Thank you so much. Thank
Yeah,
you for listening to the call of God and doing what you guys are doing. Super proud of you and Jen, and congratulations on the baby too. I
thank
know.
you.
Yeah, man. So I'm proud, man. I'm honored and humbled to be your friend and just to know you all these years. You are truly a man of God, man, who who's
I'm
doing what God
editing
has called
all
you to
of
do.
that out. I'm horrible at
Nah.
editing. Dude, I mean, it's a family, right? And I
Yeah.
can never forget any of these interactions, but I really hope, my goal for this podcast is for people to hear this and get inspired to make change. And I'm literally wearing the t-shirt that you gave me 10 years ago, that it's still holding up.
Oh
Incredible
man.
quality, people. I mean, you got to see this thing. It doesn't even look faded. It's a black t-shirt. I don't understand how you do this.
Yeah.
Stanley, thank you so much for
Yes.
jumping on, man. We
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate you.
Thanks for listening to this episode. We really hope you enjoyed it. Such an inspiring conversation. And so I hope that helps you take some actionable change and inspires you to do something crazy and different and new, but ultimately positive for your community. And so share your feedback and your ideas. And if you just need encouragement, feel free to reach out to us. But let us know what you think. We'd love to hear from you. You can engage with us on our social media platforms. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can find all of those channels on our website at restoringourcity.org. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe. You can follow this podcast on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, and you can also watch the videos on YouTube as well. So thank you for listening, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks, everyone.